Hi, everyone. Welcome to Informed Dissent, a news podcast that brings you dispatches from the gender culture war. I am Ben Appel, the author of Cis White Gay, The Making of a Gender Heretic, and I'm here with my co-hosts, author and journalist Lisa Sellen Davis, a gentleman of trans experience, Corey Cohn, the writer and researcher Sarah Mittermeier, and Jamie Reed, the gender clinic whistleblower and co-executive director of the LGBT Courage Coalition, has stepped off screen for a moment. She will be with us shortly, but we just wanted to get started. So welcome, everyone. I wanted to start with some news headlines from this week because there's been a lot going on, especially in terms of closures and pausing gender-affirming care, quote unquote, for youths. Kaiser Permanente has announced that beginning August 29th, its hospitals and surgical centers will no longer provide trans-related surgeries for youths under the age of 19. The puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones will still be available for the time being. And then on Wednesday, Connecticut Children's Medical Center confirmed it would soon, quote, begin winding down, end quote, its gender care program for patients under age 19. The next day, Thursday, Yale New Haven Health, which along with the Connecticut Children's Medical Center, was one of the most prominent providers of pediatric sex trait modification in Connecticut, announced it would no longer provide puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones for patients under 19. On Tuesday, so a couple days earlier, the Center for Trans Youth Health and Development at Children's Hospital Los Angeles officially closed. So we know that was coming. It officially closed on Tuesday. So I guess Joanna Olson Kennedy is out of a job, I guess. I don't know what's going on there. Other blue
I
state
don't think we know what's going on with her.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if she's keep staying on as a pediatrician or what.
Right. And actually, Yale New Haven Health is the employer of Meredith McNamara. Is that correct?
Yes, but she doesn't see trans kids. She just
Teaches?
who does that expert testimony and writes reports about them.
Right. Okay.
She herself doesn't treat them, apparently.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Lior Sapir recently reshared a good article he wrote about for City Journal about Dr. McNamara and her deposition. From the New York Times, there was a big article this week about, even how blue states are ending pediatric gender medicine for children, or pediatric gender medicine. Other blue state and city clinics are Stanford Medicine in California, which has paused surgical procedures, including new puberty blocker implants for kids under 19. U Chicago Medicine, the Chicago area's Rush University System for Health, which is pausing hormones for new patients under 18. DC Children's National Hospital, which beginning August 30th, no more prescriptions for blockers or hormones, and the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Another news announcement first, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee is now barring men from competing in Olympic women's sports. Reports the New York Times. This new policy means that the national governing bodies of U.S. sports federations now must follow the Olympic Committee's lead. So before the federations, I guess, could make their own rules, now they have to follow their lead. Beginning August 1st, for example, USA Fencing will require trans-identified males, non-binary athletes, trans-identified females, and intersex athletes to all compete in the men's category.
They call that a thrust stop.
Yes.
Thrust stop. Ben, did they say in the Times barring men from women's sports?
No, that was my.
Oh, okay.
That was my. Yeah, I amended that. I was not quoting the New York Times.
Okay, I was shocked that they would use such incendiary terms.
Absolutely not. No.
Maybe in 2026.
But they did. Lisa, you pointed this out, I believe, recently, and I noticed it as well in the article about the New York Times article about the blue state bans and so on. They did acknowledge that there were critics on both the right and the left that oppose or object to pediatric gender medicine, which was a small step forward, I guess, for them, which is great. There's stuff to discuss there, especially with the bans. Today, we wanted to talk about one particular child that has been affected by pediatric gender medicine and can kind of serve as we think maybe an example of what other kids might go through or be going through. Lisa has a piece, I think it went out this morning, right, Lisa, on Broadview, on your Substack about Avery Jackson. And Avery Jackson was the cover child for National Geographic in 2017 about transgender kids. And it was like the transgender revolution or something like that. And there's been a lot of discussion online recently about where Avery is, because there's been speculation in terms of where he's a male, identified as a girl, very young, I believe 4 or 5 when they socially transitioned him, and then started puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones actually at 11. And then years later, Debbie Jackson, Avery's mother, who's very involved in advocacy and activism, had come out and said that that Avery was now identifying as non-binary. And I think I heard asexual somewhere, but I'm not sure. And I don't know if I saw that in your article, Lisa, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, kind of changed the name again. Debbie said, we're not announcing the new name for privacy. Avery had talked in the past about, regretting being part of the whole activist world. We'll talk about that. But we were kind of discussing about how Avery is one of those kids that's kind of existing in this liminal space, this kind of no man's land of kind of creating intersex kids where you block their puberty and you give them cross-sex hormones so young, before they can consent to it, or before they understand the repercussions of it, and then they're kind of grow up to be in this kind of in-between place. Which way do I go? And so on. So, Lisa, do you want to start a little bit with that and tell us about your article and what you learned and how you got this information?
Well, I'll just say that I just one morning, my friend and sometimes volunteer editor texted me and said, do you see this stuff going around about Avery Jackson? And it was, he's detransitioned, he regrets. And I started poking around, and I get very nervous, I think, around certainty, that I don't want to say things with certainty that I can't back up. So I started looking at what people had said and the evidence they used for this, and it didn't match up for me. And I posted about it on Twitter, and then someone very kindly sent me a lot of screenshots of the mom, mostly from a private Facebook group for parents of trans kids over the years. And this question comes up not only about Avery Jackson, who has, as you say, gone from the literal kind of poster child for trans kids to I have no public life and I'm non-binary and maybe asexual. I forget, was that Avery or was that somebody? Maybe that was it too. There's something has come up about some of these kids whose puberty has been blocked, saying that they're asexual, which is something we also need to talk about. So anyway, the bottom line is we don't know how Avery feels. We know that Avery stopped pretty soon after coming out publicly, stopped wanting to be part of this activism life. And that I've never seen, I watched the documentary Transhood that Avery is in, and which chronicles that photographing session for National Geographic. I never saw the mom, Debbie Jackson, say, by the way, if you change your mind about this, it's totally fine. No, I never saw the creation of off-ramps as they went forward with this public trans life. And,
well,
and then,
we wouldn't necessarily see that in a documentary, though.
That's true. And I only have the screenshots that have been sent to me. And I guess that's part of the point, is we only know what little glimpses we have. But even without knowing where Avery is at, does Avery regret? It certainly seems that he would be infertile. And even without knowing that, this is the kind of child that's been created through these interventions. We don't know how many there are, but there are probably tens of thousands of them, at least, who've gone on cross-sex hormones. And now we don't know how to help them. What if the clinics are shutting down? What if they regret? What if they don't experience it as regret, but are realizing, as Avery did, that whatever this trans space that they thought they were going to can accommodate them, it's not for them. Where do they go?
Right.
And how do we grapple with that?
Right. And Lisa, can I read a couple of the quotes from your piece just in terms of just to give people an idea, because Lisa's Broadview piece, which I'll link to in the show notes, includes a lot of screenshots from that Facebook group. So I think as you said, someone kind of clandestinely joined this group and for parents of trans kids and people who were transitioning their kids.
Yeah.
And on Facebook, a Facebook group. And so Debbie Jackson was one of the top contributors to that group. And kind of like the mother hen, I guess, of the group, it seems like, in terms of the way that things were phrased here. But you noticed, Lisa, they push that, these drugs and these medications and these protocols improve mental health. But here's Debbie Jackson, who says, quote, "Yes, Avery plunged into severe depression starting about 3 weeks after getting the implant, which is the puberty blocker implant. She started a low dose of estrogen about a month later to stabilize her moods, but it didn't really help. For about a year and a half, we struggled. She wouldn't leave the house and barely spoke above a whisper. It took getting on the right antidepressant, lots of therapy, and CBD oil to get her back to a good place. All of this was pre-pandemic, so thankfully we have had tools in place to deal with the last few months." Jamie.
Yeah. Clinically speaking, this is a mess. So the puberty blocker is being sold to this parent and this child as a necessary intervention that will assist or help your mental health, right? That's how it's sold. This is not the first case that I saw a child initiate a puberty blocker and have their mental health tank. Because the thing that I think we need to remember about this puberty blocker is it's not just stopping the next steps of the body progressing through puberty. It is essentially arresting the body's hormone development, turning it off for some people. I've heard them say they imagine what it would feel like if menopause started like this. Like you just hit a wall and it's menopause, because it's basically the cessation or the stoppage of this hormonal process in the brain. For the girls, when we put them on a puberty blocker, we actually would expect them to bleed for the first time. That 3-week kind of window where Avery's mom is talking, what we would expect to happen is they would have a first menses, essentially, and then everything would be arrested after that. The body would almost essentially be shedding that uterine lining that was there, because it's shutting the whole system down. It's like, oh, we were just told in the brain, hormones are all done, turn it off. When I read that, Lisa, my gut just dropped, because I saw so many kids, we put on the puberty blocker and their mental health tanked. And what never was ever addressed is, instead of let's add a whole bunch of psychotropic medications, the question should have been, we just started something. This is the outcome. We need to consider and remove the blocker and see if the mental health goes back to baseline. And then one more clinical side note here. Lisa, you wrote that this happened to Avery at age 11. Avery is now 18. So what year? This would have been under SOC 7. So this would have been under WPATH Standard of Care 7, which it's very not clear, it's not concrete, but essentially it says in the area about adding a cross-sex hormone, because they put the puberty blocker in, mental health tanks, then they start giving estrogen a month later to an 11-year-old.
Boy.
The
Boy.
WPATH guidelines at this point have age 16 as the recommended age to start cross-sex hormones. 16, and this child is 11. This is, to me, so far outside of guidelines too. And then one last note, Avery was transitioned in my home state in Missouri at Mercy Children's, which would have been the Kansas City version of St. Louis Children's Hospital. When I read your piece, I just saw so many of our own patients in Avery, what I saw exactly clinically happening.
I mean, you know, in your piece, Lisa, you wrote, quote, Debbie maintains that she was a conservative Southern Baptist before Avery's transition, that her family was unsupportive. She gave up her identity, her community for the child. And then you write, which would not only put enormous pressure on the child to continue in transition, you know, being that his mom, you know, ended these relationships with family, but would, quote, incentivize Debbie to insist on Avery's transness at all costs. Otherwise, she'd lose her identity and her community all over again. You know, and going on to more there, I mean, there's plenty here, but in one of these screenshots, Lisa, you shared another parent whose identifying information has been removed here. It says, help. You know, someone had posted in October 2018 in this Facebook group, help our AMAB, so a 6-year-old daughter, so boy, our 6-year-old boy has such dysphoria. She hates her penis so much. She says she wants to be a real girl. We have talked to her about being able to get a vagina when she's older, but this is so far away. Okay, pause for a second here. And just like, there's no getting a vagina, right? There's no getting a vagina. You can create a permanent wound. You can remove you can castrate people, but there's no creation of a vagina, one. And then, of course, not even touching on how puberty blocking affects these surgeries, which were widely unsuccessful to begin with. Quote, we tell her she's beautiful in the inside, that she needs to take care of her penis so the doctors can make a vagina later, that she is a real girl, and anything else we can think of to try and make her feel okay. The reality is she hates her penis, and there's nothing we can do to change that for many years. Is there anything that can be done at this early age? Could they remove her testicles? Not that that would solve the problem, but maybe it would help her. Or we see a doctor at the gender clinic, but there's really nothing for him to do until she starts puberty. We worry so much about these dark moods. Edited to add, she's now 6, soon 7. She transitioned at 3 or 4. She's fully socially transitioned. We've done the legal name and gender marker change. She's loved and affirmed and supported by her family's friends and school. Debbie Jackson says, we've been dealing with this for 8 years and it's getting worse, not better. To answer your questions, the idea
Keep doing it.
Right. Right, exactly. The idea of some sort of surgery was offered by her amazing endocrinologist who has seen how much she suffers, but even pediatric surgeons who operate on intersex youth near puberty wouldn't touch the idea. Virtual hugs, the person responds. Damn, what surgery was suggested? I wonder if surgery for these younger kids will be offered at some point in the future if their pain is seen, or is it really a technology issue that there's not a good surgical option yet? My kid isn't so bad off yet, but staring down another 15 years of body dysphoria is daunting. Debbie Jackson says, suggested were removal of testes because she had 2 hernias and they had been inside for so long that she would have likely ended up sterile no matter what. So what I'm assuming is that because when it says they had been inside, I'm assuming that means that the testicles had not dropped, maybe, or the hernias were inside.
Or is it tucking?
I don't really know, but right. So it's sterile, and then it says another was some tissue removal that they do on intersex girls. I don't recall the name of it. It was all to possibly remove some tissue to allow for easier tucking and less material to obsess over. But there has been talk about, I want to hear obviously continue, but there's talk about, okay, well, let's see what does Avery think? Let's not speculate about how Avery feels about these protocols. Maybe Avery's happy, we can't really, to me, this is child abuse. And so it really is not very different from kind of asking or, kind of saying, well, let's speculate about whether the sexually abused child, maybe they're happy or maybe they look back fondly on this. It's a similar, to me, in my opinion, it's a similar argument to say, well, maybe this kid looks back and doesn't mind being beaten by their parents so badly, or, and it's different because these are parents that have been advised by doctors and clinicians and professionals to go down this road, right? So but to me, this is mutilation of kids. And I don't know what other language to use for it. That sounds alarmist and crazy, whatever. If it sounds right wing, I don't know, but I mean, that's crazy.
So I have so much anger right now. Again, though, these doctors, this is WPATH SOC 7 time. It is clearly written in SOC 7 that only 6 to 23% of these children will persist. These doctors needed to be talking to these parents with the assumption that their child would desist, not persist. Because statistically speaking, their child was going to be a desister. So the fact that any doctor even had a conversation with Debbie about surgically touching this child's genital tissue is it's asinine to me, because that doctor should have known that 94% of these kids are going to desist.
But not if those studies were from an era before social transition. And social transition radically, we didn't have the research then, but pretty soon after that, Christina Olson had launched this trans youth project where she was studying socially transitioned children. And only a couple of years ago did the first paper come out that showed basically an inversion of that statistic, which was that instead of something like 20% medicalizing, it was like 80% or something.
So you're saying previously kids weren't socially transitioned. It showed high desistance rates. Now that kids are being socially transitioned, they're saying actually they're going on to transition. And I think trans advocates at the time, when these studies came out, said, look, it proves that, trans identity is constant, and these kids, and it's like, the skeptical way of looking at that is no, when you're locking these kids into the social identity as trans, they're going to continue in that route because you've been telling them since they were 4 that they're actually in the wrong body. The adults in their lives are telling them these things.
I think though, what I'm trying to get at, or like what my feeling here is that these clinicians themselves were like, if we imagine that WPATH is an actual legit organization that has these quality standards of care and that the clinicians should be following them, then what this case again represents is that even back then, even in SOC 7, the clinicians were already way out on a fucking limb and they are not even following WPATH standards. And so part of my first reaction to Avery's story here is I'm like putting back on this hat of like, I'm working in a center around that time and I'm supposed to be following WPATH. If I'm a clinician in the center in this time, it specifically says in WPATH SOC 7, you need to be really cautious with these little kids, and it's quoting these desistance rates. And so what I'm getting at is like, even in Missouri, they're already well beyond what even WPATH, and we all think that WPATH is batshit crazy. So can you like just imagine for a minute, these clinicians are already well outside of what WPATH is saying. And that's what angers me.
What was the guidance on social transition in SOC 7? I don't remember. I think it was underappreciated. Like, I know that the Dutch initially recognized the risks of social transition and persistence of an identity that might have shifted. And then as puberty suppression came online and as this moved to the US, social transition became very common. But what was the official guidance in the 7?
So they were still operating under the assumption that a parent would not have already socially transitioned their kid before coming to a center. They were still operating under the assumption that it was going to be the clinician's role to guide and or recommend social transition. Again, where this had already gone so far off the rails is that these parents were socially transitioning their kids on their own with no clinical guidance. And really, like, when you read that part about the parent had already legally changed this child's name and gender marker in early childhood, like, this is just, they were just so far off the rails of even WPATH.
And in fact, in Christina Olson's study, many of the children had not been diagnosed with gender dysphoria necessarily under any care. They had been socially transitioned, sometimes just via the parents. And I think it's important to talk about the parenting culture. And it's interesting that this woman supposedly came from this very conservative world, because I can't imagine that it's quite the same in the conservative world, but in the liberal bubble and the world in which I raised my kids, it was under this time of the gentle parenting zeitgeist and the concept creep of harm, right? So that we lost the ability to, I think we've lost touch with how to parent generally. And I want to, no offense to my parents, but it's not like I really know from my own childhood, but, we were told, several people told me never to say no to my child. And that turns out to be actually one of the most important words for parenting, because it turns out, I realized later, that setting the boundaries is really important. And that when your kid, this is something I didn't realize at all. When your kid presses against the boundary, your job is not to move the boundary. Your job is to press back so they know where it is. They are feeling for the edges. And so you can say that even about, can I be a girl? They're feeling for the edges of sex and gender and reality. And I actually just said to someone, I was texting you guys before about how I thought I'd made a new friend, and then I maybe said the wrong thing and it's going to be awkward. And she was asking me about my own kid and said, does she want to be a girl? And I said, no, she is a girl. She just always will be. And that, was this huge red flag, not about my parenting. It was about, obviously, like, my take on sex and gender. But the idea that you would say to a child, oh, no, honey, you actually can't, Jazz, sweetie, you cannot become a girl. And I'm so sorry. And that's might be really painful and disappointing for you. And I'm here for you. And then depending on what kind of, your parent you are, I'm the kind of parent that would say, wear that pink sparkly dress and do it. Because I totally don't care about any of that. Obviously, I did that with my kid. In fact, I would say to a certain extent, I did. That was my approach. But yeah, I grew up I raised my kids in this culture where if they felt bad, they had been harmed, and saying no hurt their feelings, and that was harming them. And what we, of course, now know is that these kids who didn't, and I think I've said this before, but who didn't learn to exercise their struggle muscle, it's like immunity, right? You've got to get sick in childhood. You've got to eat peanuts in childhood. You've got to develop, all of these different ways to handle what life throws at you. We used to read violent fairy tales to kids. Prepare them, read Grimm's fairy tales. That shit is
Yes,
all
about the witch eating you and her house is made of candy. I mean,
you can handle the full range of human emotions and experiences. And so I think what happens is that these kids don't develop those skills. And not to I'll wrap this up, but I remember some therapists talking to me early on as I was researching this about moving from child-centered care to child-led care. And this became child-led medical care. And this is what Debbie Jackson is advocating, except for she doesn't follow it herself. But we finally arrived not only at child-led medicine, child-led psychology, but child-led parenting, in which whatever you want to do, honey. And it turns out that that's not good for kids' mental health for the most part, is that it can lead to a lot of anxiety. And when Avery starts to express doubt, I don't see, and again, Corey's right, I can only see what was leaked to me. But we don't see it being child-led when the child wants to do something that's not in keeping with the direction the mom is going in.
Yeah, I was also thinking about, there was a mother of two little boys who at one point identified as trans, and I think she went by the name of Rose when she wrote about her experience. And she describes, her first son wanting to be a girl, and she and her wife want to be really supportive and affirm him as a girl. And they kind of raise the younger son with this, well, we don't know if you're a boy or a girl, you have to tell us. And there's this kind of boundarylessness that at the time she doesn't appreciate, that it creates a lot of anxiety and uncertainty for him, that he isn't being, his reality isn't being affirmed. But then as soon as he says he's a girl, like his big brother, they're like, oh my God, you're a girl. Of course, that would create a sense of relief for the child where it's okay, I know what I am. And then you go from this, oh, we have no idea, we have no way of telling your body can mean anything, to, yes, you're definitely a girl.
But in that mother's case, that was what kind of piqued her and made her realize, okay, this is not the right thing, because, transitioning, I can't have two, this is obviously my younger son being influenced by my older son and his identity.
And then taking another look at the older son. Yeah.
Oh, gee, if only the New York Times would have pushed back on the father in the most recent story at Kaiser, who also claims to have two trans daughters.
Right.
Yeah. I think he's a journalist
his wife have also
too.
made and he and his wife have made having trans children their identity too. Just like Avery's mom.
You're talking about what are you referring to here?
Jesse Thorne.
The dad who says he has two trans daughters, which means he has two boys who are going to UCLA. His wife has written a book about trans concepts for preschoolers.
Oh, and this was the dad that was mentioned in the New York Times article about the blue state closure. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So there's no pushback there. It's not okay, it's just taking it as fact, as this is a man with two young trans daughters and he's suffering and they're suffering and this is bad.
Well, I think he has a lot of media profile because prior to this, he was already a journalist, I believe, right? Jesse Thorne?
He interviews a lot of famous people. He had a show called Bullseye with Jesse Thorne or something like that.
Oh,
we will not be invited on as guests.
Okay, all right.
Have we made pushing back on these ideas our identities? The five of us?
I don't think so. I have a lot more going on in my life and I talk about a lot of things out of this podcast, this is obviously gender focused. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I guess I really
You guys are no, that's not what I thought about you at all. I actually think that you are maniacal and you focus on nothing. You have nothing to offer.
No.
I'm kidding. But
I think people do get a really skewed picture when your public presence is about one-ish. None of us are lifestyle influencers who are also recommending pillows and skin treatment. Well, Corey is a hat influencer, but that's a really recent development.
Lisa, I think it's an interesting question. I don't mind that there are experts on a topic. So we want we want people to be obsessed with a topic and become experts, you know? I mean, like, I want to read a book by a World War II expert who, you know, every vacation he takes is to an old World War II monument and like is so obsessed and so into it that that is his research focus. What I think you might be getting at is where is the self versus the expert? Like, am I an expert in this or am I because I have to maintain this as its existence for my self-identity to maintain my whole sense of self. Is that kind of where you were going, Lisa? Like, do you think that the mom and this dad represent that it's become their...
I think because everything is so charged and so political. It's like when I talked to this neighbor and presented my ideas this way, it just everything changed. And I had dinner with my friend's mom last night. I only hang out with octogenarians now. And we were talking about how there were a bunch, since October 7th, there are a lot of relationships that also in Jewish families that like can't hold now. I'm like, yeah. And before that, there was COVID, and we cannot seem to separate ourselves from these issues. They color how you see the world, and they color how the world sees you. And I can understand how a parent loses herself in this, especially as been brought up, when every expert is telling you your child will die if you don't do this. I mean, as a parent, you know, I mean, people did say that to me after I first wrote this thing in 2017. That was actually the second thing I wrote about it. But, you know, people said, if you don't transition your child, she'll die. And I didn't take that seriously because I was like, my kid is over here and totally fine. But if my kid wasn't doing well, I mean, when your kid is not doing well, it is super hard to separate from that. And because of the way we are raising children, we are way too, you know, codependent. Can't feel okay if they don't feel okay. But it is, you know, there's a saying, you're only doing as well as the child that's faring the worst, or whatever it is. So
can I jump in here real fast?
To disentangle all that. Yes, I'm blabbing.
No, and I'm glad. I wanted to jump in because I wanted to respond to something that you were making me think about. One, when you were mentioning Debbie Jackson and you were saying, you know, coming from this conservative background, which is interesting because this, you know, this kind of paradigm exists so much in blue bubbles. But to me, it's like, well, who are the people that are in blue bubbles? A lot of times are the people that come from really conservative backgrounds and are kind of rebelling against how they were raised and what they're doing. There's this kind of reactive that can happen. It's not everyone, but that can be a strong thing. And there can be so much more for me. And I'm speaking from personal experience. You know, when I left fundamentalist religion growing up, I was like in the opposite direction. I was on this new righteous cause. Like I had a new mission, like I see the light. You know, those people are bad. This is who's good, and this is what's right, and this is what love is, and care, and concern, and support, and inclusion, and acceptance. And I'm going to full throttle go in this direction. And I think that can be an experience of them, of a lot of parents that come into that. So it can, I don't know if the conservative versus blue, it's very vague, I think, in some respects. The other thing is, you know, Lisa, you were saying like, oh, over here, my daughter's doing well. And it's like, well, did your daughter ever say, Mom, I'm a boy? You know, people said, what are your daughter's pronouns? And you're like, she's a girl. Your daughter but when you're saying like the distress that they're experiencing, to me, in my opinion, what I see as the common denominator in the kids that do result in in actually having distress are the ones that are suffering from severe, not gender dysphoria, but social dysphoria of feeling so uncomfortable and alienated from the rest of society because they're so different from their same-sex peers. So when you have these young kids like Avery Jackson at 4 or 5, and they're saying, I'm a girl, and the parents are like, we follow the kid's lead. Oh my God, thank you for telling us you're a girl. Okay, now everything in your life, we are going to affirm this delusion. And yes, we're going to send, Debbie talks about it, like sending Avery to school in pink sparkly clothes, like when they, he came out, like because this is what a girl is. And then Avery gets older and is like, actually, I'm non-binary. And she's like, oh yeah, feminine, being female was really limiting. And Avery's this whole spectrum of genders, and you can't nail him down. And it's like, so anyway, it starts so early. And I feel like this idea, has captured the idea of the existence of a trans identity and a trans child has captured is so powerful and so strong that that alone dictates what trained clinicians and doctors are telling parents to do and what parents are doing with kids. It's like that's the beginning of the whole thing is believing that this is actually a possible outcome and not that a kid can suffer from distress, but let's look at what's going on in their lives. Let's get to the root of this and not throw medicine at it, or let's, not think of this as a physical problem that needs to match the inside. That's the toxic, to me, that's where the toxic idea begins. And what can go from there? I can't believe in that anymore because that is created a lot of suffering, in my opinion.
But where should Avery go? I mean, Corey, I'm curious your thoughts about what kind of messaging, people are still holding Avery up. Either, the mom was holding him up as the poster child of trans, and now the kind of gender critical world is holding him up as a kind of gotcha. And I am feeling very bad for this child all around and thinking also about what we do with this generation of children in whom we instituted intersex conditions, and some of them might lose the medication they think they need. And at any rate, they have the bodies they have. And yeah. I wonder what your thoughts are.
When you are in the world as somebody who's been through this medicalized process, and just like anybody else, you wake up and you do your chores maybe and have your breakfast, you go about your days, you celebrate your own birthdays, those with your friends and your families, you celebrate your holidays together. Like you're going through building all of these meaningful experiences, and the context of all your gender journey gets baked into all of those meaningful moments. I think one of the hardest things to understand around the concept of detransition for people who've not gone through a medicalized process is that you cannot just take everything and throw it aside and pretend like all of those memories and experiences that you built weren't there and that they didn't mean anything, right? You can't just throw that aside. And Jamie, I hope you don't mind. I'm interested in your follow-up from this because we're in a very deep relationship with somebody who's in that state. You're not reinventing yourself from, or I don't think the right mindset is that you're reinventing yourself from a whole cloth. I think that's a toxic part of transition in the first place, to leave your entire past behind you. And I think it's also a toxic mindset to think that when you detransition and you're leaving that all behind you. Because every single day you have an opportunity for there to be meaning in your life. And I think Avery is going to have to probably get a lot of therapy and a lot of support, because he's never going to be an ordinary man. he's always going to have this past of medicalization, and he's always going to have all of the social element in his past. And instead of trying to box that up, instead of changing his name and trying to put it behind him, I think the only way that he can become a whole person is to find some way of integrating that. And then whatever is meaningful today, to focus on continuing to make meaningful moments, not to hide everything that happened to him in the past, but to incorporate it as part of his current identity and the relationships that he builds with other people. You're always going to be a weirdo, Avery. I'm sorry. But there's others.
There are other weirdos.
So Lisa, when you said that Avery was held up by one side as the success and then is being held up maybe by the gender critical, and I know what you're talking about on Twitter as this like example of it not going well. I can understand
I meant that they're saying they were claiming he regrets and detransition, and we don't know that.
But I think we don't know that. But what I do think clinically we do know is that this is not a success case.
Doesn't seem like it from the post.
From a clinical assessment, if we're thinking of the original Dutch protocol concept, it is not a success case to have a child. Remember, the three first words were persistence, insistence, and consistence. What we were taught in a gender center that we were looking for before we would transition a kid was that they were persistent about that identity, insistent about that identity, and consistent. The consistency was one of the three pillars. It is not part of that paradigm a success that the identity did not remain consistent. What would have been seen as a success was that this child would have said at a very early age, I am a girl, and then remained in a female identity. That is not what has happened. We can go.
That's what we invented gender fluidity for.
But that's it.
It's fine to want to hold this kid up as proof that this shouldn't happen. But I think my concern is that we created all these kids with intersex conditions, and now through mimicking intersex conditions, and now we're maybe shutting that down. And I'm concerned. I want to know how to help these kids. And
I agree.
I was very moved by what Corey just said. And we people have sort of started working on detransition guidelines. There are no billing codes for it. But as Corey mentioned, for a lot of people, there is no detransition. You wherever you go, there you are. And they need help. They need help now for what they needed help for originally, which is being in the body that they're in.
Yes.
And being in the life they're in, and handling the ambiguity and handling the discomfort that they might evoke in other people who can't easily slot them into male or female when they look at them, which is a very normal human experience to stare when you don't know, because we are taxonomists by nature. And so maybe I had a visceral reaction to people claiming certainty that they know what this child's experience is, because I think, and I'm sorry, I'm getting like a grandstandy and about to cry, but I think that actually now we kind of need to listen to these kids. Like maybe we needed to tell them no before, but we have got to figure out where they are now and how to help them where they are. And that's why I think what Corey said was so important.
Yes.
I
They are
want to,
stuck
yeah.
somewhere.
And a good example of this, I shared this in our group chat, guys, and I'm not sure if anybody read it, but I also shared it online in this Chameleon's Substack, goes by Chameleon online. I hadn't been familiar with his or her his writing. Trans-identified male who transitioned, fairly young, and wrote this piece called, I'm going to put it in the show notes, and it's must read in my opinion. It's called Down the Rabbit Hole, Cake or Potion, and then in parentheses testosterone or estrogen. And Cam the Chameleon writes and compares his story to Alice in Wonderland, kind of drinking the potion and becoming big and too small and not being able to fit through the door, and then like which way to go. But here's an example of this in between space, and this is one of the most troubling things about this. I mean, when we're talking about, robbing kids or young people of their future, their future sex lives, their future fertility, etc. Once this person realizes, I mean, struggling with severe migraines, right? Estrogen, severe migraines, having this fog, all of these things going on. Went through bottom surgery fairly young, he says. And he says, he went to a urogynecologist and they looked me in the eye and said something devastating. Continuing estrogen with the kind of migraines I experience puts me at serious risk of a brain aneurysm or blood clots. She told me that staying on estrogen was a choice between quality of life and quantity of life. Those words still play in my head. I walked out of the office in tears. And so that day I quit estrogen cold turkey. Followed hot flashes, night sweats, emotional instability, and yet I began to recover. The migraines lessened, my blood sugar normalized. I was no longer pre-diabetic after 4 months. And then here's what really blew me. It says, when I first asked for testosterone, it was as easy as taking a bite of cake. No questions, no long discussion. Just a sweet, soft offering laid before me marked "Eat Me." I told my endocrinologist I wanted to try a low dose of testosterone gel. The prescription was ready that same day, like someone had been waiting for me to ask. It says, I rubbed this gel on my shoulders, harmless. Then at first, everything brightened. My energy surged. My thoughts sharpened. The fog that had quietly, and you've talked about this, the fog, Corey, and other people, or no, maybe another friend of ours has talked about the fog that was blanketed over him. Yeah, the brain fog. The fog that had quietly blanketed my mind for years began to lift. I didn't realize I had been dreaming until I started to wake up. A few weeks in, something deeper shifted. I began noticing my husband in vivid, magnetic ways. I was transfixed by his facial hair, the way it grew, how it moved with his skin. I looked at him like it was the first time. My heart would race, the way your blood sugar spikes after eating too much sweetness at once. It was intoxicating. I hadn't known this part of me was asleep. And then came the sexual thoughts, intense, new, and unfamiliar. It was like someone handed me a key to a room I didn't know I had locked. At first, I panicked. I thought I was hallucinating, but both my doctor and my husband reassured me this is normal. They were right, it was, but the relief was paired with something harder to admit, grief, because while the feelings made sense, finally, the body that held them no longer could. I had medicalized before I had ever known what my sexuality actually was. I drank the potion before I knew what it would cost, and now after surgery, that alignment between mind and body, between desire and function, felt broken irrevocably. There's just more to read here, and so it's a vital read, but what that shows us is a case in point that, I mean, to hear this person's experience of their body waking up sexually for the first time post surgery, and I've heard this before. Richie has spoken about this. Where you taking testosterone and suddenly, and Shape has spoken about this. There's a part of you that's kind of revived, but there's also a body. The body's not equipped for that, and so to realize how, we talk about these kids don't know who they are yet. They, so many of them haven't even dated or don't even know, haven't crushed or had never kissed somebody, and they're being put on puberty blockers, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like to hear that experience of being so freaked out and thinking you're hallucinating because you're having a human reaction to attraction to your partner, that you're like, what is this? And you have to have a doctor and your husband say, that's normal. That's what living is. That's what human sexual attraction feels like. That's heartbreaking. And so when we're talking about people like Avery Jackson, in my opinion, no, it's not a successful story, and none of them are, because that's what they're taking away, regardless of where they end up in terms of whether they were going to be gay or not gay, or whether they were going to be this or not this. When you socially transition your kid and you affirm them in an identity that's not real, you're you're doing them a disservice that will permanently affect the rest of their lives, to me. And I think that we show that. I think the studies, like you said, Lisa, earlier, Christina Olson, in that study of like, oh, when kids are socially transitioned, their identities stay more constant 5 years later. I think it was a 5 years post social transition or whatever it was, a follow up. Sarah, what do you think about all this? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think that we have created a new way to be human that didn't exist before, which is that you can be a human adult that has never really gone through puberty, and that there are certain human experiences that some of these young people will just never be able to have. And I think that I think it's going to be lonely. I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of kids that are going to be in that category, though. Um, and just something that I've been thinking a lot about the things that I read online throughout our conversation, talking about, the parents and the investment of the parents in this trans identity and the effect on the kid. Like in the detransition communities, young people, especially when they're, kind of running out of steam with transition when they're still in their teens or they're very young, and they'll say, either my parents, supported me and they cut off family members who didn't think this was a good idea, and I don't know how I can tell them, or like the parents have sunk so many costs in ways that trap the kids. Or when we talk about just trying to come to terms with a body that has been altered in ways that cannot be undone and maybe can't even be fully appreciated what was lost. Like there are a lot of young people who will say, like, I don't really know what it means for my, I don't know what I gave up. I don't know what it means for relationships. There has just been a really, really heavy cost.
And it's hard not to know, my mind kind of goes to, okay, who do we blame in a way? Like,
Yes, Ben. Yeah.
yeah, like, because, you think about and you bring up important points about like, we need to listen, really care for these kids and see like, what do they need, these people who have been harmed. And then also the next thing is like, okay, who can we hold responsible and who is responsible? Because I'm reading Debbie Jackson's post or these other parents and I'm horrified, right? But then it's like, well, they've been misled. And then, well, where does that come from? So what are your thoughts, Jamie?
I really try to always hold as much compassion as I can for the parents,
Mhm.
and will often say that the parents were lied to. But Debbie walks a very, very fine line for me. And it's often the parents of the really little kids that got transitioned that I think hold is much harder for me to kind of grapple with. There's so much responsibility to go around. It's the AAP, it's the Endocrine Society, it's WPATH, it's all of these clinicians. But there is something that really sticks out for me about a small segment of these parents, and it's often the parents of the really little ones. When the really little ones would get scheduled with our clinic, for a long time, as the person who made the decisions who they were going to go see, they were too young to see the adolescent medicine doctor. She sees adolescents. They were often doing too well to see a child psychiatrist. They're not on. Oftentimes, they were not put on psychotropic meds until we started medical interventions. And most psychologists there were very few psychologists willing and open to see a 3 or 4 year old. And so I would initially be set, the only person I had to schedule them with was the endocrinologist. And the endocrinologist did not want to see these kids. He would say, well, I don't need to see them until I put them on a puberty blocker. And I think there's some element where we completely abandon these parents to make up all this wackadoo crazy shit on their own in their bubbles from the internet. But they also did things to their own children that nobody was telling them was okay to do. Nobody
Except
was
for the
saying,
parents.
except for other parents. Like no clinician was telling them socially transition your kid or God forbid, like who is telling these parents to like tuck and bind these kids? Like what? Like where did they get this from?
I think the famous affirming clinicians, Aaron Saft and Olson Kennedy. I mean they were advising let the children lead. So do whatever your kid says. I don't.
But what 3 year old comes up with tucking and binding and compression garments and
Yeah, that was really the infusion of the adult sex industry into this, and there is a brochure on that was funded by some kind of adult sex toy company, which I will find that and link that in the.
I'd like to address Ben's question about who's going to be held accountable. Ben, this is my belief. The answer is that broadly, none of the industry people are going to be held responsible. There's not going to be any accountability. There's not jail. There's not lawsuits. None of that stuff is really going to manifest. Where we're going to see accountability is as these kids get into their late 20s and early 30s and mid 30s, and they start going to their parents and demanding answers. And that's probably the only accountability that there's ever going to be, is the children who've been affected by this demanding accountability from their parents. Because everyone else will have moved on by the time the people who've been hurt by this start asking for the answers. The people who've been directly injured, because everybody's being hurt by this. But by the time that the people who are directly hurt by it, their doctors will have moved on or retired or died. And it's really the parents that will be asked for the answers.
Which is heartbreaking in itself, because I wouldn't wish that on a parent, even regardless of what decisions they've made. I don't know. But I guess it's
depends on the parent.
Right, depends on the parent, right? I mean, I feel like Debbie Jackson, if Avery comes to Debbie Jackson, I would be like, yeah, Avery, you have a lot to ask your mom about. That's in my opinion, but
there's something about what Corey's predicting too that sounds very plausible, but is troubling in that this was a hugely institutional operation. This was an industry, and that we might never reckon with the creation of this demand, and that it will be a interpersonal and interpersonal kind of accountability rather than institutional. And that's also really sad.
And one thing I wanted to say earlier and I forgot, but it just came back to me. When we're talking about social transition, and Lisa was saying like, well, did your daughter ever like say I was like, when this kind of thing, when kids are saying, oh, I'm a boy or I'm a girl, and they're the opposite sex, parents are like, oh, 4 or 5, oh, thank you for telling us. There's such a powerful thing that happens there, right? I think that the sex of the child also comes into play there, because Lisa, you said I was kind of treating my child this way, like, okay, do whatever you want. But with your child, who's a daughter who wants to maybe dress more like a boy or wear more boy typical clothes or whatever, in our society, it's not easier, but it can be more acceptable for young girls to behave in that way. Whereas for boys, you put a pink dress on them and you send them to school, they are going to be the target of bullying. That is not obviously to say that girls aren't bullied for being masculine or butch or gender nonconforming, but there is something to be said for that. And, I think that kind of points back to how initially it was boys showing up at gender clinics when they were, this is
And it was still the little ones that showed up in our center were always still the
always
boys.
the boys.
Always the boys that came in at the 3, 4, 5. The preschool age was always the boys.
So that is really, to me, is like a crux of what we really need to look at and figure out, because we have to create space somehow, then there's the Ken Zucker approach, which is like, no, take away their girl toys and make them cut their hair until they get used to it. And then they're going to be, well adapted kids, like, what is the solution there? What is the right way? I mean, I talk about my own experience. I was relentlessly bullied, but what did I do? As a coping mechanism, I conformed. I purposefully changed how I walked, what I looked like, how I talked, my voice. I avoided certain words. I changed my music taste, everything to adapt because of how terrifying it was. Now, I don't know, I mean, I survived. I ended up how I am, who I am. I don't, think that I'm a flaw or a kind of developed or whatever, but you know, I don't know. I look and I see, I see femme adults and femme men who are unabashedly that way. Um, and there are objects of ridicule, a lot of ridicule, even in gender critical spaces. I mean, there's this thing like, oh, this is woman face, and it's like, well, that guy's not claiming to be a woman, I mean, it's one thing if he's acting, super whatever, and he's saying this makes me a woman, but aren't we doing a disservice if we're, criticizing a man who behaves in a specific way? Um, I would like to hear, honestly, I really want to know the answer to that. Like, did I do the right thing? Like, is it sad? Is it, good how I ended up, like, or is it just, actually, that's just the way it is. It's really neither one or the other. There's no moral to the story. It's just how life is. It was a coping mechanism, and that's how you are, and that's how you ended up. And there's no shoulda, coulda, woulda. This is the way that everything progressed. Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah.
But
Ben,
then
you're
Go ahead.
sorry, you're asking a hypothetical question, but if you're going to direct your question at somebody, who do you think would be somebody that you could direct it towards? Did you do the right thing? Who would you ask?
Well, I would ask, I mean, there's a couple different people. I could ask the people that have transitioned, like you, Corey, who have a trans experience and who medicalized young. They were gender nonconforming males. And I would ask the people that, like, Peach, who is
Pear.
Pear. I'm sorry, Peach. I knew that didn't sound right. Pear, Pear, sorry, Pear, who is the adult male who did not medicalize and who's very androgynous. And I would say, what are your thoughts? Is that the right answer, Corey? I mean, is that the answer you thought was the right answer, or what were you thinking?
Well, I tend to agree with you. And hopefully nobody would say to you, yes, you did the right thing, or no, you didn't do the right thing. But they would talk about the trade-offs.
Mhm.
Okay.
But one of the trade-offs is that you did not permanently remove healthy function from your body. And I think that that's probably better to have a healthy body than to not have a healthy body. For so many reasons.
I agree. Well, I'm glad we made that all about me at the end. That's Sorry, I
That
really
is the
didn't. I
trans
did not mean to.
experience,
I
then.
did not
Welcome.
mean to turn it towards a story about me. Also, to clarify for listeners who are like, "Wait, who the hell is Ken Zucker?" When I talked about like the Ken Zucker approach,
Mhm.
a kind of early advocate for, or early, I guess, a sexologist or a psychologist who was working with young trans-identified kids or very gender nonconforming, and there was this kind of approach that he recommended people to kind of acclimate really gender nonconforming kids to get them to behave more like the typical boy or girl so that they would fare better in society among their peers. And it was almost like an intervention. It was the opposite of social transition. It was whatever it was, social
Which
affirmation of,
is
of identity. But
It
it
was
was,
like gender conformity training. Like
yes, yes,
seriously.
normalizing therapy.
yes. So there's just a lot to be said there.
Yeah.
Any final what, let's see, non-gender here.
Well, I just have
Oh,
one final thought.
Please give it. Yeah.
Lisa, you, I guess, had kind of gone back to the concept that this was ingrained in all of these institutions and that the institutions really drove this in so many ways. I still think as some of these institutions scale back, I keep hoping to read the press release from one of these hospitals saying, we're scaling back, but we're going to offer bone density scans for all of our patients who are puberty blocked. We're going to offer covered fertility counseling for them as they grow up. We're going to offer endocrine screenings. That's what that would be the institutional response. You don't even have to say the sorry that medicine never says, because for medicine to say sorry, then they claim culpability and then they know it opens up them for lawsuits. But they don't even have to say sorry. They could just say, this is what we're going to do for these kids as we scale this back. And I'm going to keep beating that drum until one of them finally says something similar.
I like it.
Yeah.
That seems like the responsible thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think before we get to the non-gender stuff, I think that we should come back to the question about making your ideas part of your identity, because that's a much bigger conversation. I think it's very interesting.
Say this
But
again. What do you mean? Expand, Sarah.
Where
I'm sorry.
Lisa, where Lisa said we're all
Yeah.
one of
yeah,
the Debbie
how
on
far
the
have
side.
how far have we gone in kind of lashing ourselves to a dissenter or a dissenting identity or whatever it is, and what effect does that have, and what is a healthy orientation to the kind of work that we do? I think it's a really interesting conversation that we were trying to cover too many other things today, so I didn't want to take it there, but I want us to go back there.
Okay,
Put
that's
a
good.
pin in that
Put a pin in it.
heretic identity.
Yeah.
Oh, and one other thing. The silent dads, this whole Avery story still has this through line of the silent dad. Where was the dad in all of this? That, yeah.
Yeah.
Put a pin in that too.
Okay. All right. Who wants to do their non-gender thing?
I watched a documentary on HBO, My Mom Jane, by Marissa
yeah.
Hargitay, about her mother, Jane Mansfield, and it was surprisingly deep
Oh.
and emotional and really interesting. And I'm glad I watched it. I didn't feel dirty after.
I second that.
I do sometimes.
Great film. Who's next? Sarah, what do you got? Jamie? Corey?
Sandpipers.
What's that?
I went up.
The
Well,
bird?
I went.
Birds?
Yeah, they're little seabirds, little birds that live by the water. I went up by Lake Michigan and saw sandpipers like just kind of running up and down the shore, and they are just hilariously like geriatric and spry at the same time, because like they're dashing up and down the beach on their stiff little legs, and they're adorable.
Cute.
Yeah.
And they make a delicious snack.
No.
No, sorry. I don't eat birds.
There's a Portlandia episode. Put a bird on it if you.
My favorite skit.
Yeah.
It's quite humorous. Put a bird
Also,
on.
I love to put birds on things.
Now,
Birds,
save
I actually do.
Okay, I started a super weird book that I don't know how to pronounce, so somebody help me out here. Albion.
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 Seed, the 4 British folkways in America. I had a politician tell me if I want to understand politics in the US, I need to read
And now
this.
you understand politics?
No, I understand that I picked up a very, very, very long book, which is good for me because I'm a speed reader, so it at least makes me slow down. And some of these pages, the footnotes are like half the page, but it's been interesting so far.
We need to put a pin in speed reader also. I need to come back to speed. I might be saying put a pin wrong. Anyway, I want to talk about the speed reading because I am not that, but another time. Corey, what?
Oh, well, I've been getting more interested in performance, and so I tried out for a movie role as
What?
Zelda.
Shut
Wow. See, I thought I'd get some support here, but
I'm fully supportive.
This is older Zelda. This is Zelda, like a flashbacking to
Oh,
Zelda
the
the
Legend
Elder.
of Zelda.
Yes.
This is so dull, but I guess it's worth mentioning. I finally broke down and paid some landscapers to come in and help me reset my yard. And it cost
Love it.
money. It cost real money. And it's the best money that I've spent recently. It is
that
so
money?
easy to fall behind when you've got so many different things that are happening. And I feel a lot of responsibility to maintain my own property. And it's very difficult for me to ask for help, even when I'm paying for help. But getting that help was it's going to be a continual source of shame that I couldn't do everything myself. And the expense barely helps to offset the self-loathing that I feel.
That's great. And you actually are inspiring me now because there was like
Yeah.
I wanted to change this. Listeners are going to be like, loser, you could do that yourself. But
Mhm.
I want to put a new shower head on my shower. Now I've
do
tried with
that.
multiple tools. It's
No,
like
it's okay. Hire somebody to do it.
it's like welded on this.
Yeah.
I've changed shower heads before. This one is like welded on, and I'm doing it so hard that I'm afraid I'm gonna break it in half. And so
Heat
then
it.
I was walking down the road, and there's something called like the Handy Homo or something, and it's like this cartoon guy. Literally, it's like an ad for this guy who calls himself the Handy Homo.
You
And-
need
That's
it
the
in your life.
handsy homo.
I think
No.
the sort of jobs he's doing then are maybe not the ones
No,
that
you need it. You
No,
need him in your life.
I swear it's like he's like, caulking and caulking. That's a weird example that I just
Sure.
brought up. Oh,
the first
Like-
one that jumped to mind, wasn't it?
it was. But what else? I don't know. Anyway,
He
something like
talks,
that.
but,
so yeah, I think I'm gonna
He
give
can
give
get
that
in
Handy
and
Homo
help where
Corey,
tight
what's that
spots.
painting? What's that painting behind you? I like it. What is that?
This?
Yeah, what's that?
This is a Kandinsky. This is
Oh, I like
Garden and Murnau too.
I like it. I guess my non-gender thing besides the Handy Homo would be the Lawrence Wright, who I know Lisa loves.
Mm.
We've talked about The Looming Tower is a great book by him. Wrote a great book on Scientology, which I didn't read, but I know that Lisa really likes.
Oh,
I'm
Yeah,
reading
that's
one
really
of his I'm reading one of his fiction books.
I want it. The new one?
No, it's called The End of October, I believe it is. And it's odd because it's about a worldwide pandemic, but it came out like, I believe, like literally early 2020. So it's very, it's kind of like reading the movie Contagion. If you ever saw that, it's a really good movie. Really well done, Steven Soderbergh. Anyway, I do like this book. It's enjoyable. I mean, a lot of people do not want to read about pandemics, but I am fascinated by, this topic because he's such a good writer.
Oh,
And
I
it's a
would
really
totally read that.
okay.
Yeah.
So are you saying that Lawrence Wright started the pandemic?
Yeah, he is the one. But it's funny too
Yeah, for
because
book sales.
No, and it's right. And it's funny too, because actually someone could put on their tinfoil hat when they're reading this because he brings up things like escaping from a lab and people framing China, where they find out that this is da 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 da, and like all of these very things that became so relevant to national conversation months and months later, he was speculating about in this book, which is very interesting. All right.
All right, peeps.
Thank
All
you,
right, we are
everyone.
taking a
Oh,
break.
we're taking a break. Yes,
Oh, right.
we are. Listeners, thank you for being with us. We're going on a vacation, vacation for the next 2 weeks. So we'll be back on
With the
Friday
handy Momo.
with
Yeah,
Andy.
that's what I was
August
thinking.
5th,
Some
Friday, August 15th,
sandpipers.
we'll be back. So we're off on the 1st and the 8th. I will still be doing the newsletter, the weekly newsletter. So that'll still come out on Friday afternoons for paid subscribers. But we are going to be taking the next 2 weeks off for summer. And so we'll be back on the 15th with a guest that day, a lead author of a paper about the effects of testosterone, long-term testosterone use in males, and also what's gone
Wait,
down.
estrogen.
Estrogen, what did I say? Testosterone, estrogen, I mean, and things that have gone down in like kind of institutional capture and the capture of the medical industry, which will be interesting. It'll be a good follow-up conversation, I think, to today's conversation. And in the future, I do, like I said, Sarah, you mentioned bringing back to like how our identities are formed by our attention to this matter. I think that'll be a good thing to talk about in the future.
All right.
Also, like or subscribe.
Right.
Like
Please.
and subscribe.
Informdissentpod.substack.com.
Please like and subscribe. Yes, and paid subscribers, we appreciate you so much because it keeps allowing us to do what we're doing. So thank you everyone for doing that. And again, with paid subscribers, they do get that newsletter every week. And we really appreciate it because we like doing this and we really want to be able to keep doing it. Have a great summer couple weeks, beginning of August. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye, everyone.